Great video.
How many of you all play Roblox? Play with Roblox. How many of you are kids? Yeah.
A lot of the 55 million daily actives are here. All right.
My name is Joanna Popper. Many of you know me as most recently I was global head of VR go-to-market for HP. I just recently left that role and am taking on a new role as Chief Metaverse Officer of CAA. So going back to my entertainment roots where I came from. And we have Bjorn here who's going to talk to us a really interesting chat about Roblox, about the Metaverse, about creators, about brands. So Bjorn, go ahead and introduce yourself.
So, hi everyone, my name is Bjorn Book-Larsson. I'm the VP of Product for the Avatar team at Roblox. I've spent about 20 years in the game industry and 3 years in VR, which is how I ran into Joanna many years ago. And now, after 2 years at Roblox, I am very excited to be here and talk about some of the things we're doing in the Metaverse, or in our Metaverse, and also to have a discussion about how brands and others can get engaged with what we do.
Excellent, excellent. So let's talk about Roblox and your role. So how would you describe Roblox, and then tell us a little bit, you talked about a little bit more about what your role is there, who's using Roblox these days. People have a sort of image of what Roblox is, but let's talk about real data and really what it is.
Yeah, so what's fascinating about Roblox is a lot of people think Roblox is a game. It's not a game, it's a platform. And it's essentially a two-sided marketplace where creators make experiences and then players show up and they play those experiences. And we have, I think our official stat right now is we have 55 million daily active users and somewhere between 2 and 250 million monthly active users. Everyone who's on Roblox creates an avatar. They are representing themselves, they're representing some version of themselves. And what they end up doing is basically creating a digital version. Obviously in the Metaverse, we don't have technical problems like these. Which is a nice thing. And you make a digital version of yourself, which then becomes your representation. And my team's primary responsibility is to make more ways for users to express themselves. So the ability to design or create new types of clothing, design or create new kinds of ways of interacting with your friends. And then the final component of Roblox, which is really important, is the social connections that the players make with each other. So that if someone plays a Roblox game, they can instantly join another player or one of their friends in that world at that moment. So it's an interesting environment to work in because we don't make the game, which means all we do is make tools for the game creators who then in turn create games using those tools. So it's a little bit meta, pun intended, that we have to essentially nudge you in a certain direction by creating better and better tools to then empower you to go and make better and better games for people to come play.
So we have creators and we have brands in the audience. So what are some important design considerations to think about when getting involved with Roblox? You talked a little bit about tools and your subtle nudging that you're doing.
Yeah,
what do people need to know?
And I think actually in that trailer we showed Gucci Gardens. I think we showed a few other of our brand experiences. And again, what we end up doing often is we recommend to brands that they go work with indie studios. So there's different brands on the platform, like Sonic has something on the platform now. There's Vans, the shoe company, has made a really cool skate experience. But what's interesting about the platform is those experiences weren't built by Roblox, they were actually built by community developers. So the Vans skateboard experience was built by 4 guys out of Sweden called The Gang, and they've been awesome. The Sonic the Hedgehog experience is built by a studio out of LA called GameFam. And GameFam is fascinating because they have hired, I think they have 100 employees at this point, and are almost exclusively building stuff for Roblox. So you can actually build an entire business around Roblox as a distribution platform and an audience engagement platform.
And so how do you sort of matchmake or bring together brands and creators?
Well, often brands aren't quite sure yet what to do in the Metaverse. So we have a lot of exploratory conversations where brands will sort of ping us and say, hey, what should we do? And it's everything from sneaker brands to fashion brands to sort of IP that you would expect in the game world. And it's interesting because the number one advice we give brands is that they actually have to make an experience that is fun. If you just go ahead and make something and then slap a fancy name on it and no one plays it, then it's like you haven't actually achieved much in the metaverse. So the biggest challenge for brands is actually to make a meaningful, social, engaging experience on the platform that has long lasting value. And that's hard, just if you think of making a game in general. It's not straightforward how to make a hit. But it's, so the best advice we give to brands is that they need to work with established community developers who understand the platform, who understand the audience. The other thing we tell brands, which is usually surprising to them, that our fastest growing age group is now from 13 to 25. So the older demographic is growing much faster. And actually over half of the users now are 13 plus on the platform, which also allows for more sort of aged up experiences and brands and systems to be part of the platform, while still having obviously a strong cohort of younger players. And just for full disclosure, I have an 8-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they generally tell me what we do right and what we do wrong. So,
What are their key insights?
the key insights. They generally yell at me when things work poorly, but the key insight actually that I got from them, which was fascinating, was they have such different player profiles. My 13-year-old is fascinated with a game called Creatures of Scenario, where you basically, it's like a dinosaur evolution type game. And then my 8-year-old likes Bloxburg. She likes to build stuff. Apparently houses with 4 swimming pools is the thing to do. So
you live in a house with 4 swimming pools?
Virtually, yes.
Virtually, yes.
We do.
My nieces also are huge fans. They're 10 and 12 now, particularly the 10-year-old. She loves Fashion Forward, which is a game all about picking out your outfit. It's a competition game where you run around a room and pick the best fashion forward outfit, and then you walk a catwalk and evaluate each other. So some values there, some values.
Quality of life lessons
yes.
we teach our children.
Exactly. So community on Roblox is an interesting foundation, and such a huge audience. So what do you how do you think about those social aspects of the metaverse more broadly, and in what you're building today?
Well, community is actually interesting because it sort of, there's many types of communities on Roblox. You have different international communities. Roblox now is we have creators from I think 180 different countries and markets. The primary community of Roblox is really your closest 200 friends that you hang out with, because they're the ones that you can target directly and sort of join in an experience with. So you have sort of these interesting circles, concentric circles of macro and micro communities that engage all the time. There's also, of course, communities around specific IP. So a good example is Adopt Me, which has sort of a rabid fan base, and they have people who sort of live their life vicariously through Adopt Me. So in some ways, we are just the stewards of the machinery, and then we fascinatingly get to watch what gets built and what those communities are that sort of naturally spring up. And I think we released some data that our top 10 experiences keep shifting quite a bit over time. So actually communities and what they like to play is not a static thing. It keeps changing.
Is that what you would have expected?
Probably not. Like you would have, there's some IP that sort of is relatively persistent, but there's more movement probably in the IP than I would have assumed prior to joining the company. Which is cool, because now, when we release new tools,
right?
We release new tools, or recently we released something called layered clothing. Layered clothing allows you to basically make puffy jackets and pants and shirts and all kinds of outfits. And what's cool about that system is it scales to fit your body. So if you're a dinosaur or a blocky character, it fits perfectly. So unfortunately, clothing in the real world doesn't work that way, because then we could just buy one jacket and it would fit you forever. But that is actually a really awesome system that now encourages the community to build experiences that we didn't have before. So the fashion experiences and other kind of systems can get more high fidelity content because of these new tech community or component that we built.
So what was the catalyst for building layered clothing?
I think the layered clothing system took us about 2 years to build. So it was for the time I've been there, it's been one of our major things that we've been working on. But I think some of the original ideas had been around for many years. So Roblox has been around for 17 years, and our CEO had very early a lot of these ideas about how to make materials and systems super generic. So you could basically build anything out of anything. But 10 or so years ago, it was very, very difficult to build systems that would accommodate that. So I think the tech now is at a stage where it was possible to build it. And it's a pretty cool technology where you now can sort of layer multiple layers of clothing. It will always fit. And then your outer layers get affected by what you wear on the inner layers. And again, the community has started doing stuff for that we hadn't even thought about. Like if you put 20 pieces of hair on one character, what happens? Well, the community is figuring this stuff out. It gets very large and it gets very tall.
So like hair band?
You get a massive hair outfit, and that works really well for some experiences.
Interesting, interesting. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned a couple success stories. You mentioned Gucci, you mentioned Vans, you mentioned Sonic the Hedgehog. I know Gucci just has done a number of different things and just made some announcements in the last week or so. Let's dig in a little more on some of those and why you think those are interesting or successful, and what are some lessons we can take from those, both from the brand side as well as from the creator side.
Yeah, so Gucci did last year, they released something called Gucci Gardens, which was more like an art exhibit. So you can kind of walk around, you can see a bunch of cool things. They sold things at that time, like there was a Gucci handbag, which I think sold for more in Roblox than it did in real world, which was fascinating. And I can't remember what the dollar amounts were, but it was more than the actual bag would have been in the sort of Gucci store. They really released a new system, or a more sort of deeper experience in the last week. And I think they learned from the first fashion-focused release, and now they've come back and sort of done more of a interactive experience. And I think that's what we see with brands. Brands who launch things, and I won't name which ones, that are not good experiences may not come back because they have often thought that all they have to do is to sort of slap a fancy name on something and it works. But the reality is you actually have to build an engaging experience or game for it to become something meaningful for the audience to come back to.
Right. And we saw that in VR too in
Yep.
some of the earlier days. And what, you've talked a little bit about this, but it's hard to predict a hit, but what are just some of the things that make an experience engaging or have that social glue, that social connection? What are some of the through lines there?
Yeah, so we actually brought two studios up when we were talking at the Game Developers Conference earlier this year, and we sort of had them walk us through, or the audience through their development process. Because Roblox provides so many of the tools, it was actually really interesting to watch them sort of say, well, we don't know what we're going to do today, we changed our minds, we built an entirely new thing this morning, and then we tested this piece of the game loop. And then tomorrow we're going to build something completely different. So because the tooling is so integrated and you can so rapidly iterate, you can see the results of your changes much faster than almost any other platform. One of the stories I tell is my 13-year-old had to explain to her what other game engines do. So again, not to name names, but there's other game engines out there. So I had to explain that if you use one of those engines and you want to publish this on iPhone, it may take you several weeks to get that approved. Whereas on Roblox, if you decide to build a new thing and you push the publish button, it takes about 15 seconds for it to show up on Android, iOS, Mac, PC, and Xbox. And there's absolutely no sort of further step needed. So then she looked at me and she was like, why would I use any of those other engines? And I was like, exactly. That's exactly what you do.
Some bias in your family, it sounds like.
Very biased,
Very
yes.
biased, yes.
But it was fascinating because it is a new paradigm in how you build things. And I think what gets underappreciated sometimes is that Roblox is really almost like a broadcast medium, right? The executable is so small and so efficient. The entire iOS install is only 100 megabytes. And then you publish to it these experiences. And the effect is that you can essentially reach anyone on the planet on a mid-level device almost instantly. And that's an interesting broadcasty type concept, which is very hard to replicate if you are trying to build this from scratch in a different system.
And so what does that mean then for creators? In terms of the economic, you have large distribution, you have potential to reach to reach large audiences beyond sort of like building an interesting experience, a game. What are the, what are some tips in terms of driving traffic to the experience, as well as what are the economics? What do the economics look like broadly for creators?
I think the economics one is interesting. We have been very straightforward with it, which is we have an entire web page devoted to sort of showing how the dollars break down. And even though on paper we take 30%, depending on how you sort of look at it, as the funds sort of cycle through the platform, and as the platform, of course, acts as this instant publishing and operating system, the net effect is that developers will get between 25 and 30% after it's all said and done. But the actual cost that if you made an item and sold it on the store, you essentially get to keep 70%. But it's an interesting system because we essentially hide so many complicated functions and basically handle the hosting, the publishing, all these, all of your audience elements. You get it all sort of in one. But we have been incredibly transparent about how that breaks down. The other reason for that too is, of course, that let's call them the big platforms. So the Apples and the Googles of the world, they take their 30% off the top. So when you do the full sort of walkthrough of how that shakes out, that's why we sort of put together this entire page just to show all developers what happens in different scenarios, depending on what you build and how you build it and how you sell it on the platform.
What's been the reaction of the audiences? Or the developers?
Well, the system has actually been relatively consistent for the past 10 plus years. So I think it's been positive. We have, again, some companies that have grown to 50, 100 people building exclusive for Roblox. And when they have been trying to run the numbers to try to sort of self-publish or take the IP, they have chosen not to. One interesting aspect that people may not realize is that the developer of each one of the games owns their own IP. So if I built a game on Roblox and it became successful, I'm actually the owner of that IP. It's not Roblox's IP. Roblox provides the system. So you're free to, if you wanted to, go rebuild this thing on a different system. But so far, that has been very uncommon. Most people essentially really appreciate the way that the system is integrated.
So Roblox participates in the economics, but doesn't participate at all in the IP if then that IP went on, into other multiple universes and stories and created a movie and created merchandise and all of that.
And in some ways it makes sense because we obviously can't own, let's say, Gucci's IP, we can't own, there's a lot of, when IP comes in, having that type of ownership structure makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about how Roblox thinks about the metaverse. And some of the
Are we the metaverse?
Are you the metaverse? Does
we are
Roblox
not the
consider
metaverse.
yourself the metaverse?
We are not the metaverse. We are maybe a metaverse.
Do you believe there is a metaverse?
I think there may be several metaverses.
Do you? Okay.
I think so.
You think so?
I think
certainly a hotly debated topic.
Sure, and especially with the NFT craze and Web3 and all this other stuff, there's a whole argument about whether does the metaverse necessarily need to extend across all surfaces and all systems. We are definitely a metaverse in that once you've made an identity and you have your friends, you can sort of travel around with your identity. Most of the games will let you be whoever you defined at the platform level at the game. So we have certainly the elements of that. There's obviously other platforms very similar to it. Minecraft probably is the best example, and others that have similar ideas. Are they a metaverse? Maybe. Maybe we should invent a new term for what we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of subscribe to the Tony Parisi, there's only one metaverse. The metaverse is the overarching, and that it could be a virtual world, you could be a meta world within it, but like there's an internet and a metaverse is
Maybe
what I've
we are a
subscribed to.
shard of the multiverse.
Oh, you're a shard of the multiverse. That's
It's possible.
hashtag for sure.
For sure.
If not, yeah. So let's talk about then what, I think when we talked prior, there were 5 or 6 sort of key principles about how, what are those metaverse building blocks for Roblox?
Yeah, so our version of that is basically that whatever you create has to be persistent. Your identity has to be persistent. And then when I have made an experience, it should be very easy to publish, change, modify, and sort of update the things I do. And then, of course, all the economic systems where if I make a bunch of assets and I sell them, I should get a bunch of the benefit from having made those elements. And then it's very open-ended. Developers can choose how they want to monetize. Some of them have subscription type systems or entry fees or item sales or like different kind of ways of doing it. And it's fascinating again to see what succeeds, and it's not something we prescribe. So open-ended experimentation, and I think our CEO invented a term called combinatorialism. So like putting together all the different combinations.
Can you say the term again?
Combinatorialism.
Combinatorialism.
Like combining all these different systems to then make entire, emergent new game behavior or new experiences. So yeah, that's our easy.
Combinatorialism.
Combinatorialism, that's right.
It's easy to say.
It's a bit of a challenge if you wanted to replicate what Roblox does, because you have to build so many different elements to make it essentially work. Right?
Well, there's in the platform the network effects.
That's right.
Yeah.
You sort of end up in a system that has grown organically over such a long time that it's a very difficult system to try to replicate. And if you want it to be a metaverse, this is probably what you need to do. You need all those elements.
And what about interoperability? What's
Between
the point
Roblox and other?
Or what's the Roblox point of view about interoperability?
Easy.
I mean, because you talked about sharing across multiple platforms, including VR, which through Steam VR. Right?
So we support Steam VR. I mean, so Roblox itself is super interoperable with itself, right? Like, so obviously moving between different platforms and devices. We are not interoperable with other sort of metaverse-style experiences. But clearly we have really focused on making it very easy for you as a user to pick up the system and play it on anything that you happen to have. So your Mac, PC, iOS, Android, Xbox, whatever the thing is. We do support sort of VR through Steam VR. The challenge there is that it's not really optimized for VR, but it's something that I'm sure we'll consider doing in the future and further optimizing it when the medium spec device has more power.
And how about integration into blockchain?
Blockchain. So for practical reasons, any transaction that happens inside of Roblox, we don't really need a public-facing blockchain to make that work. There are some internal discussions about, like, are there things you should be able to mint out of Roblox, for instance, and publish elsewhere? I don't think we have made a determination of what that will be, and I think we're in a mode where we're just kind of waiting and seeing what happens in the market.
Yeah.
I think we're not a believer in sort of the crazy blockchain hype, but we also think there's some cool tech that has come out of all the research poured into blockchain over the last 10, 15 years.
So can you share what some of the pros and cons of going that direction, or is that proprietary?
No, well, I think that if you think of anyone who sort of controls this sort of very social experience, that in particular one that is so focused on safety and civility, as Roblox is and has to be, it's very hard to imagine that you can open it up to let sort of other experiences sort of push content into Roblox and out of it. When you create something on Roblox itself, we have a very deep moderation pipeline to make sure it's safe. So we probably have a lot of challenges around interoperability between us and other platforms where we think there's some risks involved with sort of moving assets in and out. In fact, we have, and I think we've been very public about this, we have more people doing content moderation than actual full-time employees.
So, we're closing thoughts. We talked about where we can find you in Roblox. For the developers in the audience, what are 2 first steps that you would recommend that they take, and for the brands?
I think for developers, download Roblox Studio and start building. Like, that's pretty straightforward. There's a ton of information on
what skills do they need, or are there?
So the coding language is Lua. The underlying systems is all written in C++. But if you understand how those systems work, then you just need the scripting level and 3D art kind of components in order to get started. Most of those, or almost all of those tools, are available in Roblox Studio itself.
Okay.
And then for the brands, we have a brand partnership team. So you're more than welcome to contact that team on Roblox. And it's actually, you can sort of search for it, and you'll be able to find the right way to get connected with that team.
What should they search for?
Oh, just a brand partnership.
Brand partnerships.
partnership
okay.
at
And so
Roblox.
how can they get in contact with you?
So for me, the easiest way to get me is probably through LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn link is just Bjorn Book. So you can always find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me.
Excellent. All right.
And I'm not a tweeter, so that's not the way you find me.
All right. Thank you very much. I just lost the musical
Yeah,
voice.
no worries. Thank you, Joanna, for hosting.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.